again. Okay, so we'll try one more time. Sorry for the interruption. Of course, this is all about lesson 6, and we'll see if I can actually share my screen now. I should have gone through this earlier. Aha, it looks good. All right. Okay, now I just got to get to the right part of the screen. There we go. So let's just take a quick look at lesson 6 here. And please let me know if for any reason you can't hear me. I don't have my headset on today, but it was working beforehand. Okay, well, let's just take a look at lesson 6. It's going to be a little bit easier than the last lesson, lesson 5. It's because this is all about soil mapping and soil testing. And if we go to the discussion board on lesson 6, we're going to get some good information here. So let us just take a look at some of the resources available. So it's pretty straightforward. For all those in the US, it's going to be quite a bit easier than those in Europe or Asia because we have the USDA Web Soil Survey. In BC here, BC Canada, there's an excellent resource and it's right here. And then, of course, there's some other resources here for outside and inside the US that I would encourage you to take a look at if you're having any trouble finding the information that you're after. But it's pretty straightforward. You're going to just find your project site location and take a screenshot of the information there. You're going to place that within your template file. So I've got an example up here that we could take a look at. That is another thing I really encourage you all to do under the assignment resources. There will be some student examples. So those are always really good to look at. And for those who want to sort of take this course and take this knowledge and create, a business out of it, they want to do this professionally, it's really helpful to just take a look at other people's work. It's something that you get sort of drawn towards because it's fascinating to see how others will document their work. It's all about really taking your ideas and placing those in a graphical context. So let's take a look at this example here. So this is the soil map and test, and this person was from BC, Canada, so they're not going to have the traditional map that you would see on the US site, but it's basically the same information. And, we're looking for the soil types and a little bit of information about the drainage. You may find that your project site, if you're on acreage, like some of you are, I believe Mary or Marion, sorry, you've got a large parcel. You may have a number of different types of soils within the one property. And then in this example, we're really just looking at the different layers of soil, what those are in terms of their thickness and their makeup. And this person has shown where they took their soil samples. Now, if you haven't taken any samples yet and you're on the West Coast, that might be challenging right now. But hopefully you'll be able to work around that a little bit. So is everybody that's on the call, are you okay? Have you taken samples or do you have access to that right now? Is there anybody who's got any challenges with that?
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead, Marian.
I took the samples, but I didn't do the percolation test. And now, even when I took the samples, the water was like, where I made the hole, it was filled already with water, even though it wasn't raining that much. And now it's just raining a lot. And we have 2 sunny days next week, but I'm not sure if it's possible to do the test.
So your holes are basically full of water. Yeah.
And I went back, but they're not really going down.
Right. Well, that is a great observation, and you can include that. Right. So it tells me wherever you've taken the test, your water table's high, most
in
likely.
all three areas, and they're far from each other.
Oh, interesting. So that's great. So that I would include that in your assignment, and that you can say you've done the percolation test. It's just hasn't, what you're witnessing in terms of you may be witnessing either very compacted soils or your groundwater is quite high. But I'm trying to remember your property, and it has a highway that splits part of your access.
Well, it's like basically it's a road, but it's only us using this road and one more neighbor.
Right. Right. Okay. And have you taken 3 samples at various elevations? So sort of higher areas or lower areas in your property, or?
Yeah, one at the higher area, one across the street, and one on this side of the street. And
they're all full of water. Wow. Interesting. And what's I'm trying to remember exactly where you're located. Have you been in some really cold weather lately? Do you think the ground's frozen?
I don't think it's frozen anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting. Well, your jar test that you will do, that might point to the reasoning for all that water. You may have a really high clay content.
Yeah.
So I would include that with your assignment, and that'll be very interesting to take a look at. Yeah, so good for you for getting out there before any inclement weather.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is everybody else okay with where they're at in terms of taking a sample? That's the hardest thing in the winter, is accessing the ground. And for those that may not be able to do a test hole, what we encourage you to do as an alternate is just to take some whatever soils you can get your hands on. It may even be potting soil, and just do the jar test with that. And it's really the exercise of going through the process and then reading the results of the jar. That's basically, that's the important takeaway. So even if your ground is frozen, and it's not usually as much of a concern on the West Coast here as it is if we get into the eastern or middle part of the US and Canada. However, they've been having some strange weather too. So yeah, so that's an alternative. Let's see here. So this is a great example in that you have an image and then a little bit of data about the microclimate and the vegetation found on the site or near that test hole. And then we go to the soil texture triangle and locating on that triangle where that jar test lands. Okay, so the hardest part of this is actually photographing the jar and having it making it easy to read via a photograph. That's the hardest part. You might have to have a little bit of light in front of the jar. This is a nice way of doing it, where you have the sand, silt, clay percentages, but having about a half a jar full of your test material is a great idea. Sometimes people put in a very small amount, and then these percentages are really, just a little bit harder to read. But that is basically how we're going to go about it. And then we have a percolation test and any observations, and the ribbon test here too. So it's pretty straightforward. And then any graphics you can include, just make this, all the more helpful for those looking at it. And it's quite interesting to see how much soils can vary on a given site. And typically, if you're in an urban setting, you'll probably find that your soils are going to be more sandy, because they import so much sand and other aggregates when they're building a house. And then that gets dispersed around the property. You probably also find that there's a lot of compaction around a building site that persists for many, many years afterwards. So that would possibly show up with the percolation test. And so on acreage, of course, it's a little bit different, or on a farm site. But it's very, very interesting to go through. And in this, we're really looking at obviously all the minerals, sand, silt, clay. And the one thing that I would encourage you to do that's not within the lesson, but if you're going forward and doing another design in the future, is to consider the soil food web, which is actually the living components of the soil. So sand, silt, clay do nothing to grow plants if there's not life in it. It's the biology that's within the soil that's actually cycling all the nutrients. So they're responsible for breaking down materials and providing the plants with plant-soluble nutrients. So it's fascinating, and some people will spend their entire life studying all of this. I was very lucky. I took a course through Dr. Lane Ingham, and she is all about the soil food web. She was one of the scientists who was part of a team that developed that, discovered it and developed that whole concept. Because in the earlier part of the 1900s, again, people thought soil was just strictly that mineral component, and didn't factor in that there's a whole world beneath the ground, which is, it's quite amazing. 1 teaspoon of fertile soil can have billions of organisms in it. So you can literally have a planet Earth in a small cup of soil, and the equivalent of human life to soil life. So the more you learn about these things, the more challenging it can be to disturb it, because when you're disturbing soils, that you're wreaking havoc in somebody's home. And there's a fine line, I think, there between, obviously with annual vegetable crops, you have to make a disturbance in order to provide opportunity for these new plants. But I guess that's one of the reasons the no-till method has come into focus for a lot of annual vegetable farmers, so that they're reducing the amount of disturbance they create. So again, that's not really part of this assignment or the course, but this, this one lesson, you could expand out into a lifetime of learning. And for those that are really, I was really lucky when I started out in horticulture. I was working with people that were very much dialed into the soil food web, maybe not knowing it by that name, but just knowing that you need to feed those mineral components with organic matter in order for there to be a really good result in whatever crop you're growing. That could be an ornamental crop, it could be a food crop, it could be any amount of different intentional plantings that you're doing here. So the soil jar test is pretty easy. Does anybody have any questions at all about that, or concerns or anything like that? I think it is pretty straightforward. If we go to, then we get into the analysis of, what do we have on hand that we can use to build soil? And this is, of course, a really good exercise to go through to identify what resources you have on your site and what resources you have locally. And often things like wood chips are the low-hanging fruit that if you can find an arborist that's close to you, that they have trucks full of wood chips all the time that they're trying to get rid of, and often a case of beer or a few dollars exchanged will really help to solidify a relationship there where you're getting regular deliveries if that's what you want. I know where we live, we're on 5 acres, and there's we've had hundreds of yards of wood chips delivered, and they're invaluable. We actually use that. We'll take wood chips and we will passively compost our kitchen waste in it for a year. And that's, that could be meat and vegetable waste. Well, we call it waste, but it's resources. And then after a year, we'll often leave it a year, and then we'll sift that material, and that's our potting mix for all our vegetable starts. And so, it's kind of a long-term process, but where you have to think ahead a few years, but then your soil, if you need any potting mix for vegetable starts, it's an incredibly it's an incredible material for starting vegetables. So not only that, for maintaining them, because you have that soil food web already in the mix. It may not be perfect or a perfect balance, but it's a really good start. And another part of the template here is just sort of the goals. And it's, I can't understate the importance if you want to have your landscape within your project respond really positively. It's going to be largely due to what you do soil-wise. That plays a huge role. It's not everything, but it is a big part of the foundation. So happy soil is going to create a really good crop for you, provided you've matched up your crop with the context of your site. But this is a great exercise to go through. And then there's a summary here where you're going to sort of repeat a little bit about that. But this is a lovely image showing some no-till work where they have a crimper. So in this case, this farm had a fall rye, and then they use a crimper roller. It's quite a fascinating machine that they pull behind a tractor. And so instead of tilling that product in, it just crimps and it kills the plant and lays it down on the soil, and it's armoring that soil. There's nothing exposed. So it's not only providing a really good cover for it, but there's all sorts of benefits to the soil organisms that can now slowly feed on that and have habitat established for themselves. So it's a great practice to see on an agricultural scale. And then we have our SWOT analysis at the end as well. So that's really the main part of this assignment. Let me just go back to the lesson. So there we go. We have soil mapping and the testing. Let me just see the rubric here just to make sure I'm covering everything. Okay. So yeah, this week is just about soil. We're not venturing off into any other part of that template. So it'll be a little more manageable, especially coming off of a Christmas break for everybody. Yeah, and then next week is, or not next week, the week after is a whole different gambit where we're looking at a cross section, which I'm not really going to get into today, but we'll have a Q&A on that before you have to submit, and that, because that is a little bit tricky, but there's a few things that you can do to make it a little bit easier. So I don't want to get too far ahead, but the soil map and the tests are the biggie. And if you have, again, any questions at all, we're here to answer them, as well as taking a look at some of these student examples. So if we take one from the US here, you're going to see what you will typically find in that USDA site. As soon as I find it, there we go. So that's typical of that map and this screenshot that you'll take. And then there'll be some codes here that will relate to the soil type. And it's really just copy and pasting that info across. But this is really great info to have. And it may not, so in a situation like this, where this is a fairly small lot, more of an herb, yeah, well, I shouldn't say it's a small lot. It looks like a half acre or so. In this situation, it may not resemble what you find on the website here. Marion, where you are with a larger acreage, and I bet you it's going to be closer. Sometimes these match up perfectly. Often in this case, there'll be more sand and more compaction. But again, these examples are really helpful, and they're all a little bit different. But the basics are there. We just want to know where the sample was taken from in relationship to your site, and some of this data here and the soil texture triangle, and where your soils or where your jar test sits on that. And you can see this test here, this image is a little bit better than the last one, but they are tricky to take an image of. And in this case, 13% clay, that's pretty high. So I wouldn't be surprised if they had a very slow percolation. So here you go, percolation was 304 mil per hour. That's actually quite fast. So it is a sandy loam, but that's very interesting. So yeah, I'm sure you're going to find that with your project sites, that it's this is a very interesting process to jump through. And if you wanted, again, to get more detailed information on your soils, of course, there's two things you could do. You could do a traditional soil test where you send to a lab a sample, and it's all about available nutrients. They're going to look at it from the silt, sand, clay aspect. And then there's the soil food web, And that's through a soil food web consultant. And there's a number of labs in the US and Canada and in Europe. And that's, again, a different approach. And one thing I like about that, I have a bias, I'll admit, with that. The one thing I really like about it is you'll take a sample, and undoubtedly the consultant or the lab will ask you what's currently growing there and what you want to grow there. And the reason they do that is the soil biology, the relationship and the ratio between bacteria and fungi within the soil is really going to dictate what can grow in that situation. And if we go back, I'm trying to remember which assignment or lesson it was, but we looked at soil succession. And here, I can just look at it here. Okay. Try and find one that's sort of a typical, it's not really showing us. Nope. Sorry, I'm just looking. There's a few images on the net that show you the succession, but they show you also the soil biology makeup. Yeah. Well, can't really find it at the moment. But I can tell you in a nutshell here, if we look at ecological succession, so when a soil is disturbed, so let's say you've removed a bunch of trees that were there and you're wanting to grow food instead, you're typically, that soil is going to be really high, have a high bacterial ratio to it. So there'll be way more bacteria versus fungal organisms. And the reason for that is as we go through the succession and the soils are left alone and they start building again, you get more and more fungal content. And let's say you were hoping to grow, say, strawberries, and you had disturbed area and your strawberries just weren't performing. Well, the strawberries would need to kind of fall up in here in this perennial weed and grasses succession area where there's an even number of bacteria to fungal organisms found within the soil. And when that happens, those plants are in their niche and they're going to do really well. And there you won't find these weak annual weeds. So when you see, you know, when you're walking throughout your project site and you see areas that are, you know, really weedy and not many strong perennial plants, or say no shrubs, you know that there's been some disturbance there and it hasn't recovered yet. And if you leave it alone, you come back years and years later, there's going to be shrubs, then there's going to be pioneer trees, and then there's eventually, you know, all soils want to become forests. It's quite fascinating. So when we grow our annual crops, we're actually trying to hold that soil in that earlier succession stage. You don't want it. If you tried to grow broccoli in an old growth forest, you wouldn't get very far. And not only because there's no light for that, even if there was light, it's the organisms within the soil don't support that type of plant. And brassicas in general do well with recently disturbed soils. Same with squash. You know, that's why often winter squash grows out of compost piles, and, you know, it's very happy with all this sort of disturbance. Whereas things like strawberries and blueberries and perennial crops and nut trees, and, you know, they want to have different soil organisms there to support them. They need different levels of support. So that's where we get into this succession. And if you do any search, Google searches with this, there are a few really nice diagrams that show the fungal and bacterial ratio just somewhat as you go through these different layers of succession. It's again, it's a little bit nerdy, but it's very, very interesting. And as you see more and more properties, you can, just by looking and observing what's going on in terms of vegetation, it tells you quite a bit. We're just in the next week starting a design for a farm in British Columbia here, a 70-acre farm, and it has been recently logged. So the images of that property, you know, it's just the whole idea at this stage to take that and to have it as a productive farm again. It's a, you know, it'll be a long journey. So it's super interesting, and this type of information plays into that. So, oh, somebody has asked a question here. Sorry, I did not see that. So, Janita, that's where you can offer us to dive into soil food web information. Yeah, so probably the pioneer in that is Dr. Elaine Ingham. That's where I took some training from. She has an excellent online course. So if you just send the soil food web, you're going to get her. She'll be the top of the list, and she's going to talk all about her school course. She wants to educate people. If you want to watch some of her content, and you go onto YouTube and type in Dr. Elaine Ingham, my God, you're going to have hundreds and hundreds of her presentations. And that's where I started to discover more about her work. And then it completely resonated with me because, you know, we've been building landscapes for, well, a long time, but since we moved to Vancouver Island, 25 years, and there's been the occasional landscape that did not perform the way I expected it to. Most of our work does very well, but the odd one, I would look and go, wow, it's underperforming. So why is that? And that was years and years ago, and I couldn't really, you know, I would just basically make guesses as to why it wasn't. But now we have the tools that if something isn't performing, it's really quite simple to determine. And that starts with a soil food web analysis of the soil and connecting with a consultant that's in your area. And there's quite a few and Dr. Elaine Ingham's in Oregon. So I'm sure Oregon is full of soil food web consultants and labs. So I would certainly, without any hesitation, recommend any of her courses or that approach to improving soils. Some of the work that she has done is just simply amazing. Some very large scale projects she's come in to help with. And it's really all about producing high quality compost. And that's where it begins. So that's what I might suggest, Janita. And it's a huge wormhole or rabbit hole. You could spend an awful lot of time learning about this, and then you just scratch the surface.
All
as
right,
with
thank
most
you.
things. So I hope that helps you out. We have another question here from Sadir. Hi, Sadir. Good to see you on the call.
Hey, Amy. Hey, everyone.
Yeah, you need help with Contour Map Creator. Okay. Yeah, that can happen. You know what might help right now, Sadir, if you want, can you type in your project site location address into the chat here?
Sure. Yeah.
And then I'll open up the creator and just see what it provides for us.
Sure.
And yes, outside the US, it can be really challenging to get some contour info. I'm just gonna get another tab going here, and
I'll be in US later this month, but yeah, until then.
go. So I'll just wait on your address here, and then we'll just paste it in. And even if you don't have a proper address, well, what we would call a delivery address, coordinates will also work.
Coordinates, I'm pinging them here.
There we go. Excellent. So we can take those coordinates and place that into, oops, that did not. Wow. Oh gosh. Try again. There we go. Aha, I recognize this. And I'm just going to make, so if you get to this stage, Sadir, you're off to the races. And what I do, I usually change the resolution, make it a little bit bigger. That might be a little bit too big, because we also want to see some other things here. And your project site, if I am not mistaken, is right here. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, so the first thing I do and I would not use this for any design work, but this is very useful for the water flow exercises that we went through. What I would do is first take a look at what you're trying to do. So you might want units in meter or feet,
Feet.
right?
Yeah.
So let's say, do you prefer metric?
Yep.
Would you prefer to say in meters?
I would prefer going with feet.
Okay, so let's go. We're just going to press foot there. And then what I like to do is do a level interval. So let's say we're going to go 1 foot contours. Okay. And on a big property, that may be not so good. It may be too much information with the resolution, but let's try it. We can always change it. So what I do is I click in the top corner and then click in the bottom corner, and then you can adjust the box to suit what you want to do here. Okay, and then all you do is you hit the get data button. So you're going to retrieve the elevation data for that.
Yeah, here, this
right
actually shows really good. This actually shows really good compared to what I actually get when I search.
Right, okay. So just make sure you're using Contour Map Creator when you're doing that.
Yeah, I did, and I don't know. I mean, I'm actually on 0.316 version. That's what actually I get by default. And you are on 0.314. And when I actually key in the coordinates and search, it doesn't even show. And even if I actually try myself like manually, like identifying the site, it looks so different.
Okay. Well, it'd be interesting to see. You know what I'll do? I'll just put this link in the in the chat here. So if you click on that, at least you'll get the same link, which will probably give you, where we started here with a map of the world, and you'll have to put in your coordinates. But you do get a legend on the right-hand side here. Now it's not very good because, trying to tell the difference between 1526 and 1528, well, good luck. However, that up here is higher ground, and you can basically determine each contour if you're wanting to count these through. But you've got, based on this, you've got water flow from say the northwest corner of the project down to this eastern side of the property. So that's the lower end. Does that help you get started with that?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, that actually is enough, but somehow it totally behaves differently on my end, actually, when I'm in India.
Interesting.
Yeah. Would you mind actually seeing my screen?
I can, yeah, what I'll do is that a large enough area for you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I can capture that. I'm not sure I can place it in here. I'll try to do that. If not, I'll just send you a note with the file.
That would be great. Yeah. Yeah, that's all. I'm having a hard time actually getting this one. So if you could send me that file, that would be great.
Yeah, well, let me see if I can attach anything here. Yeah, I think I can. I just have to put it in my Dropbox.
And one other question I have is that I'm actually coming to US towards the end of the month for about 3 months. So I will not be having access to the site. So I just want to check quickly. I didn't go through the other assignments, but do you think there will be a need to visit the site for the next assignments?
Let's just take, I don't think for the next assignment that it would be critical, no.
All other future assignments?
Let me just take a quick peek here. Sorry, I'm just trying to
Sure.
drop this document in the right place. Too many buttons to push. Oh. All right, that should get it to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's in the chat there for you. So no problem. Let's go back to that soil food web. Yeah, Yeah, it's funny, I don't see any of the normal. Huh. I guess I didn't type in the right search, but anyhow, the whole soil succession process is very, very interesting. And let's see here. Okay. Yeah, if we go back. So you want to know about site visits. Sorry, I have too many tabs open. Okay, there we go. We'll get the template here. Take a look at some of the lessons to come. When we get into lesson 9, I think you're gonna, so basically you won't have access to the site for the rest of the course, is that?
That's right.
Okay. So next week, or sorry, not next week, the next lesson, we're looking, the big part of that is this cross section. You don't have to be on the site for that. There's a local plant survey. You should be able to deal with that outside. And then there's a plant system design. I don't think you need to be on site for that. Building surveys, so zone 1 design. That's where, in your case, you'd want to drop in those temporary or proposed buildings. Because I know your site didn't have any structure on it. So if you had a shed or a gathering area of some description, that you could create a zone 1 design. So you want to think about that. Yeah. I think you could wing it without being on site. If that's the way it is, then you'll just have to do your best with the information you have. Do you have a reasonable amount of site photos and a fairly good handle on what's currently existing there? And
yes,
yeah, so you should be okay with that.
okay.
Look on that, and then the concept plan, of course, is the final part. Yeah, I don't see, everybody's going to be different. You may have been, because this is your property, you may have enough of a feel of it to be able to walk through these final design sequences, right?
Yep.
So if you didn't know the property very well and you couldn't access it during that stage, it might be a little bit trickier. But I think you'd be fine. And if you run into any trouble, just drop me a note and we'll see what we can do to help you out. But having, I think you should be good. The soil is the biggie. Were you able to?
Yeah. I got that stuff. Into the soil into jars, but I did not do any further tests. But yeah, I will do that this week.
Right. Okay. Well, that sounds great. All righty. Now, does anybody have any other questions about the soil assignment at all, and what, or any other unrelated? We have a couple of minutes left, so happy to chat about anything that has come up for people over the last 5 lessons, or any questions going forward. Go ahead, Marianne. You can unmute yourself there.
Okay. So it's about the water. There is a group here and they help you restore the creek, and they get access to the property for 1 year and they can survey everything. And I think it's because there is salmon spawning in the creek. They really wanted to be as natural as possible.
Sure.
Do you think that's a good idea?
So they're trying to restore your riparian zone. Is that?
Yeah, anything around the creek, anything that has to do with the creek.
Well, it sounds like a wonderful idea to support
Mm-hmm.
any wildlife that's there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Has there been, in your opinion, is there not enough buffering between, say, the edge of the creek and where there's any agricultural or previous agricultural activities? Like, I know in British Columbia, there's like a
Mm-hmm.
minimum 15-meter setback,
Mm-hmm.
which is really not very much. It
Mm-hmm.
should be more, but
Mm-hmm.
do you have like invasives coming up to the side?
Yeah, we have some invasives, and also the previous owner had his cows. The cows were drinking from the creek, and so
Right.
I think they destroyed
Yes.
it in some parts.
Right.
And yeah, and it's just also going along the road, and there is some erosion, and
Right.
yeah, it definitely could need some help. And it's a big project because it goes through the whole property, and it would be hard to do all by
Right.
ourselves.
So you have a group that's wanting to help you, or
Mhm.
yeah, well, it sounds like a
Yeah.
very good idea.
Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I can't, I can just give you my opinion, but it sounds
Hmm.
like that's a really, that would be one of the jewels on your property, right?
Yeah.
And to have
Hmm.
that, have your erosion reduced or
Hmm.
eliminated and have a nice buffer going up to that salmon bearing waterway, I'd say
Hmm.
if there's a group willing to help you with that and you're completely comfortable with their work and their terms, I would say that that's a great direction to head.
Hmm. And I think it's from the state. So it's a government kind of group, and we were just like worried that then they would tell us, we were not able to do certain things that I don't know. That was the only.
I see. So yeah, well, I guess maybe getting a bit more information from them, like just um,
Mhm.
what is their scope and how far back from the creek they would be looking at.
Mhm.
But it sounds like a very good idea, because
Yeah.
as soon as you say erosion,
Mhm.
that's something that's, a little off kilter. There's been some removal of vegetation and that won't heal itself. That needs some help, most
Right.
likely. And
Mhm.
you don't want that to continue, even in a small way.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
especially with salmon, you certainly don't want to have sediment filling their creek. And I'm sure that's part of what their work's all about, is
Mhm.
trying to stabilize the soils around it and provide shade and a really nice habitat for any fish that enter that.
Right. Mhm.
Yeah. So I would say that sounds like a great idea.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. Well, we're basically at the end of the hour, but I don't know if anybody has any other questions. I'm happy to chat, and if not, maybe we will wrap up our meeting here. Okay, sounds like we're all doing well. Well, again, I'm really been really impressed with everybody's work, and been doing a fantastic job, especially of that last lesson. That's a tricky one. So pat on the back to everybody. Not an easy, and all of these lessons have their are challenges in that there's so much content to view. Andrew's done a great job of all these bits of content he's thrown in, but the lessons themselves take quite a bit of effort in order for them to be meaningful. And, it's great that everybody's into doing this. And I do think this longer course, going over 20 weeks, has some distinct advantages, because all the other courses that I've been involved with have been 10-week, and it's a lot to cram in to a week with everything else going on in people's lives, where they have to work and raise families and or grow crops or whatever they're doing. So yeah, this is working out really well as far as I can see, and happy that you guys are able to find some time on your Monday morning to dial in. And yeah, thrilled to have you in the group and answer any of your questions as we go along here. So what I will do here, I guess we'll wrap up, and then if something comes up through the week before the next, so next Monday, the lesson 6 will be due. So if anything comes up for anybody and they're not sure how to proceed, just feel free to drop me a note, probably via the inbox on the platform there. And I'll keep my eyes open for email, and I'll answer you as quickly as possible. But I think lesson 6 is pretty straightforward, particularly if you're in North America, and then it gets a little bit trickier outside, but there's still some good resources again on this page on the assignment resources. And again, here's a little bit about the soil food web. I didn't realize that was placed in there, so that's great. And everybody have a great week, and look forward to seeing your work next Monday. So you take care, and thank you again for all your hard work. Bye for now.